Welcome to Crunching Data, where we go behind the scenes with the data leaders who keep it all flowing. We're talking real stories, real challenges, and the future of data from the people building it. This is Crunching Data, a podcast brought to you by Mattia, the unified data ops platform. Let's get into today's episode.
Hey, I'm Benjamin Siegel, co-founder and CEO of Mattia, and your host of Crunching Data. I'm here today with Qun Wei, VP of Data Analytics at Lemonade. Qun was very generous with his product feedback as we build Mattia, and I'm looking forward for getting more of his perspective. He has held position at big names, including Casper, UBS, and more. Qun, it's really great to have you today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you for taking the time. To kick things off, can you tell me a bit about your background and how you found your way into data? I know you've been doing a lot of other things that are not data necessarily, so would love to hear a bit how you ended up in data.
Sure. So my name is Qun, and as Ben mentioned, my path to data may not be your most typical one, although I realize most people in data has a lot of interesting background stories. So I got my PhD in physics many years ago, but even at that time, I kind of knew I wouldn't stay in academia. And my advisor also told me, you're an okay researcher. So I always kind of know I want to do something a little bit kind of close to the business. So I started my career working on the trading floor as a quant for several years. At that time, that was kind of one thing that people with my background would do. But after a few years, I also realized I wasn't necessarily into that. So I got my way into kind of a few different startups in New York. That was when a lot of the new development in data stack and the BI begin to happen. And one way lead to the other. After a few different roles, I end up on more the data analytics side. And of course, different companies have very different ways to arrange their data team. And so what they do are also very different. And this is one part of kind of what makes a data role interesting. You don't know exactly what they are supposed to do. People have different interpretations of what data should help them to do. And what I'm doing in Lemonade right now is also quite different from a few years ago when I first joined, partially because the company grew quite a bit. We grew from a single line product to now offering car and home and pet and life insurance. We want to really grow together with us customer, and the needs for data analytics team change quite a bit as well.
You talked a bit about Lemonade and how you grow. Can you share a bit what Lemonade does? I assume many people know Lemonade.
So we sell insurance, but we really want to build something that's very different from what a stereotypical insurance company usually does. And one thing we want to do is we want to actually become the most loved insurance company, which is not something that usually a company like an insurance company want to do, right? But the way we want to achieve this is actually through a technology. We really view ourselves as more of a technology company. And we were doing AI and the data before kind of the current wave of Gen AI. We are thinking about how to design our onboarding experience. We have a chatbot, and that's our main way to interact with our user. But we also think about how to use AI to price our product, to offer different experience, how you submit a claim, how certain your needs are being addressed. So this is really a differentiator between Lemonade and the many other insurance company. But as I mentioned, we do sell insurance, and we offer renter and home and pet and life and car, and that's what we do.
I can share that in the past I used the product as a renter, and super simple onboarding. Just talking with the time I think the name was Maya. I don't know if it's the same name today, but basically I was talking with the chat and very fast got a very good quote on rent insurance.
Yeah, it's still Maya, and she's based on a real person, and Maya is our chief business officer.
That's amazing. Moving gears a bit into data, can you share a bit kind of like what data and day-to-day look like for you, and some of the challenges you're facing today with data?
Of course. I'll maybe kind of go back in time a little bit. So when I first joined Lemonade almost 5 years ago, we were a different company. At that time, we really focused more on growing the business. So a lot of the focus are more on the marketing and the growth data, how to engage our users, what is the best way to find the best kind of customer for us. So a lot of focus on getting acquisition data, build attribution, figure out the best partner to work with. But over time, we also want to offer the best experience from ops side, build the best product. So the change in my team actually reflect the needs from the company. So right now, I actually manage a team that covers a few different areas. So I have a product analytics team. So this is the team that really works with our product engineering team, think about both onboarding flow, customer facing features, but also things we build in-house. There's a lot of things that we build our own, like our claim handling system, are all built in-house. And our product analytics team are trying to find the best way to improve that as well. And then we have a revenue analytics team. So that's really more on the user acquisition part, which is still a really important part of what we do. Then we have an operation analytics team. So this is day to day, how to run our customer ops in the best and most efficient way and make our customer feel really happy and supported. And then we have finance and insurance analytics team, because Lemonade is a public company, we're an insurance company. So there's a lot of things that's very unique to being a public and insurance company as well.
You mentioned that you basically had different stages. Lemonade data today or the system look very different and focus on then very different things than 5 years ago. What is ideal modern data stack in your view in 2025? How do you evaluate over time? I know from some conversation I had with you, you're some of the initial users of DBT before it was what it is today. So wondering in general, how do you evaluate and what's the ideal for you today?
Yeah, I would say there were a few years. It was somewhat kind of easy to set up a standard data stack because everyone kind of know I need a data ingestion tool. I need to have something to handle data transformation. I need to find a way to do some BI reporting. But I would say in the last few years, a lot of the things begin to show the limitation. One is you need to onboard a lot of different tools. People realize it's not just one tool, right? Keep your data quality in good place, and you want to work with different vendors, which may require you to build something in-house as well. And then the business now have a lot of different needs. So one single BI tool may not meet all your needs. So the data stack gets more and more complex. And also the maintenance. All the vendors need to make a living, so they're not getting cheap. So the overall cost is becoming a big concern. But one thing that really changed in the last few years is AI. I know this is kind of a buzzword, but you cannot ignore that since all the people who's interacting with data now have very different expectations. So I'm also challenging my own view about what are essential to build a robust data stack. Even a few months ago, I was still a believer of a really robust, well-built data warehouse. You need to have a very clean, well-structured source of truth, well-maintained, at least for the core part. But even that, I could see maybe changing in the future, because before you were building the data warehouse to be used by humans, by an analyst. So you need to think about how they would use this. Is it easy for them to know which table to use, how they should join different things? Do they have the right data and metrics to look at? But in the future, it's a very different kind of environment. And I think context, semantic layer now becomes popular again, right? How you can maintain those things that is not embedded in the data itself becomes even more critical. For now, I actually don't see a good solution yet, but I think that will be kind of some areas everyone needs to pay more attention to.
Yeah, I feel like from what I'm seeing a bit in AI is that if you don't like the context becoming extremely critical, as we see like text to SQL as tools, there were many tries in the past 2 years, startups that try to do the best text to SQL. You just talk with it and you get the SQL or you get the answer. But we see it doesn't work well enough yet. It could change, but it seems like the biggest challenge, at least from what I'm seeing, would love to get your take, is having context. The data that lives without context is very hard to, especially when there is business context to the data, a very
Right.
specific business context.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think on that, there are kind of two parts. One are the general business context, right? You need to know the definition, who's asking that question. This usually sets apart what is a really good data analyst versus an average one, right? So a really good one knows I can ask you a question. You already know what I actually mean because you worked with me before. You know what I actually want. The question itself already include a lot of context. This is the part I do think with AI, there can be some really interesting use cases. For example, if the AI maintains certain memories, then over time, they develop kind of a good context about who's asking this question, what other questions this person has asked. All those can be really helpful. That's not just a basic context on the definition, but more on why they're asking this question. On the other side, how to maintain kind of the quality of this, how to validate this, become a new kind of muscle a lot of team needs to think about.
Are there any unique use cases that the data team is looking currently when it comes to AI? Many use cases that you're asking yourself, should I solve it with some AI solution rather than the standard solution?
Yeah, there are a few. I think I'm kind of focusing first on what can improve my team's day to day because they need to really see the value before they can help the broader organization to use them. And one is just basic model building. There are certain things that is not even the full power of AI. Certain automation or autocomplete, the context is much easier. I have team member who's experimenting with some of the tools that's more tailor made for engineer, like Cursor, other tools, but they can already see a lot of use cases to make their day to day just more efficient, right? Not necessarily enable them to do different things, but it takes them much shorter time to do a lot of things before. But what's more interesting is how we imagine people interact with data. There's kind of the obvious candidates. There are certain type of questions. A lot of the data analysts, if you ask them, they really don't want to do. Very trivial questions. Can you tell me what this number is? Why this is different than the other? Can you show me what's the right dashboard to use? These are kind of the obvious candidates that you can find a way to build maybe an AI chatbot or AI agent to help you with. But the more important and the more interesting one, in my view, is people may have a very different ways to interact with data in the future, like dashboard. You need a dashboard because that's the best way for you to know the number. But you don't want the dashboard itself. You want someone to tell you what is going on, what should you should do, right? I can see a future that we see less dashboard because you don't need that anymore, right? You can skip that step and then maybe just really focus on what insights you want. So that's kind of the really interesting part. We're trying to see whether there's something we can already do to enable our internal kind of team to rethink what you want to do with data. And then we'll see kind of how we can help our stakeholders.
How do you decide what's in your stack and what's noise? There is a lot of noise, a lot of vendors. The modern data stack was pretty big. We see some consolidation, but how do you kind of like avoid the noise?
Yeah, I think the first step is really to ask yourself what you want out of the tool. And sometimes you really just want the most basic capability, right? Data ingestion tool, sometimes people will tell you, I can do additional things, I can do that, I can support this vendor. But if you know, I only need to have reliable data with this 5 connectors, that's your requirement. So really think about what you need, and then you can kind of focus on the right tool, because sometimes having too much capabilities could mean that you need different ways to maintain that. And that's kind of the first step. You need to know like what you actually want before you engage with the vendors. And then two is to see the connections between different services, right? This is kind of where if you just consolidation between different tools, I personally don't believe that's the right way to approach them. But there are certain things that just naturally go together. So when you get some data, you want some basic ways to monitor whether all of this are going well. You want some basic ways to track whether the data is valid. You want to be able to kind of surface certain outliers. Those just go really naturally together. So if you have some kind of different tools that can do all of this in a very organic, easy way, great. I'll really kind of prioritize finding that one solution that can do all of this. But some other things are very trivial. I can do them easily in-house. Then I wouldn't necessarily want to kind of create another dependency and just add another tool to my data stack.
That's super. Chun, you've been around the block for quite a bit around data, and you've led and worked with a number of data teams. You saw, I guess, multiple cultures and multiple way of managing and working with teams. What is the one lesson you have learned the hard way?
I think really depends on the company, but I do feel people always have a certain expectation about what data team should deliver. And I think a very important part is to really align with what your team is supposed to deliver. Otherwise, you may waste a lot of time and effort on things that you think are important, but ultimately are not that important for that particular company. And sometimes for people who work in data for a while, you may already have your own bias. But I do think part of what we do is really to serve the business. There's kind of one thing I want to really emphasize. One, I don't think the data analytics team should be a service organization, meaning we're not the one you submit a ticket, you have some kind of request, right? That's not what I mean. But we do need to serve the business needs. We really need to understand what the business wants to do. Sometimes the solution is not a fancy model, beautiful data. It can be back of envelope calculation, right? So if you can deliver that without investing fancy whole data stack and building the pipeline, you should focus on that, right? And the other part is really iteration. You should factor in that you may want to deliver a certain thing and see the reaction, and then fine tune a lot of different setup, and that's really important.
You work cross-functionally a lot nowadays. Do you have any tips for working with other departments, especially when everyone is relying on your departments?
First, I want to say I don't think I have figured out all of this yet. Really depending on the
It's
team
tough.
and which functions, right? And I think one component is really to learn your audience, who you're working with, right? So you can have product team, but different PM working very different way. You can work with different finance, how they work are very different. And I think very key part, maybe kind of two part. One is you do need to earn people's trust, and that's really important. It's not just like data quality or I deliver some insights. People need to kind of feel that you know their pain points, you understand them. So they trust you to work together with you. And the next part is really to challenge your own kind of assumption. We often have very strong point of view. People actually want us to bring that view. They want someone who can tell them you're right, you're wrong. But in order for that view to actually be meaningful and useful, you need to do your homework. You need to understand what they actually want to do. So sometimes for certain areas, I actually expect my team to be almost an expert in that field. So if you are in marketing, you don't have to know the day-to-day operation of setting up a campaign or other things, but you should understand exactly what the channel manager needs, right? You need to feel their pain, right? So then that's kind of where you can establish really good relationship and then think about what you can do to make everyone's life easier. And over time, it becomes more of a partnership. Once you reach that stage, it's a very different kind of game, right? Because then you don't have to think too much about trust, how we work together. It's more about what is the best kind of way to achieve things in the we don't have unlimited resource, right? So it's prioritization, figure out the best thing to work on. But once you kind of reach that step, it's a very different kind of game.
Super interesting. I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you said building up trust. It's very easy to kind of like break the trust as well.
Yeah,
But
super
it's
easy.
very interesting the moment you get to you phrase it very well. I think the partnership layer, similar to when someone comes into the work first few weeks, months, and they build the trust. If they build it well, then even if things goes wrong, you can recover relatively fast. But it's very interesting
Yeah, one thing I'll add is sometimes data team need that trust and breathing room because things will break, right? So if you don't have that trust, you'll never get out of this hole, right? So things, doesn't work, but people trust you, they will give you time and space to figure things out. And that's really important for your team, right? So that's kind of one part that people should take into consideration as well.
Moving to some more fun questions.
What is the
Sure.
most controversial opinion?
So this may be controversial and maybe kind of offensive for some people. I know ever kind of since the self-service, BI platform, and now certainly with there are this kind of thoughts that everyone can do good data work as long as you have an easy way to access the data. I don't think it's necessarily the case, not because of capability, right? That does play a role. Not everyone would actually be very good at analyzing data, even if you have all the things accessible to you, right? But it's also whether that's what you expect people to spend their time on, right? People have their own strengths. Even if they could do this, doesn't mean that's the best way to, arrange your team. And I know now there's a movement to see like now we have different ways for people to interact with data with Gen AI. You don't need like an analyst to answer simple questions. I just need to build this interface. Then I expect everyone to be able to figure things out on their own. I don't think that's realistic or the best setup, right? I do think there are certain things you don't need an analyst or kind of a data professional to do, right? That I acknowledge. But you also don't want everyone to become a data analyst.
I think the interesting part is that because it's becoming slowly more accessible, not just to one company, to all companies, over time, right? Some people will be behind, some people will be ahead of the game with AI and accessibility. But the fact that it's becoming so accessible means everyone is on a plane level. Like, basically, you get to a point that everyone is on the same playing field, and then you answer simple question, fine. But if you cannot go to the complex question of like, I know, slice the revenue by region, by zip code, by forecast, and add more layers on top of that, then you're again in the same playing field that everyone is. It will take some time for everyone to get to that playing field, but we will get to that playing field, and then you do need the talent, right? Like the innovative thinking of like, how
Right.
can I look at product data and slice it and dice it in a way that will actually bring value?
Exactly.
If you were not doing anything data related, what would be like your dream job? I know you did physics, you did a lot of things in your life, but what will be like a dream job if it wasn't for data?
Definitely not a physicist because I actually don't think I'm very good at that. I still have friends who are professors now, and every time we talk, I just feel like I am not very good at physics. I don't know whether I would do that as a job, but I do really enjoy, theater and other things, and that's not kind of very data related, more kind of on the art side. And I think that may be kind of interesting areas for me to get into.
That's amazing. Well, Sean, I really, really appreciate the time that you took to join us. From the first day I met you, I kind of like learned that I'm other than the fact that we work together, I built like long-term friendship with you. So I really, really appreciate your views and I know you did not share this, but like you're constantly testing new things and looking at kind of like how the future might evolve, which I appreciate that, especially knowing that from the Casper time, you were kind of like in the mode of experimenting. And I think nowadays, if you don't experiment, you're basically just going to be behind. So there is
Yeah.
no other way than experimenting.
100%. I always tell my team the most important quality is you need to have this kind of intellectual curiosity, not because you need this to do your day-to-day job. You just want to learn things. You want to explore different things, right? And that's actually make your day-to-day life more interesting, more fun as well.
I agree. When it's becoming monotonic, right? Like when you, at the end of the day, if you work in data 15, 20 years, if you don't really love what you do and the aspect of, making or being curious constantly, then you will, at some point, you're just going to get not happy about what you're doing and you need to enjoy. There's so many interesting things within the numbers.
100%, exactly. And I feel this is actually a really interesting time to be in this world because with Gen AI, it does expand what a typical person can do. Like a data analyst now can also be a developer. You can build some apps. You can do a lot of things that otherwise need a more serious data scientist. But you also have the connection to the business. So it's actually a great time to explore and think more about more things you can do.
I feel like I talked with another person on crunching data on the podcast, and one thing you mentioned is a controversial thing was people hire data science too early, and I think that might be true as time goes on. Means before 5-7 years ago, it was different story. Now you have like models that are very very they seem simple, they're not. They're 1 or 2 line of code. People invest a lot of time in GPUs and things in order to make that easy, but it's basically allowing an analyst slash analytics engineer, like everything kind of like blend in slowly together because you have more tools and power to do things.
Yeah, I agree. I think the quick iteration, really understand what you're trying to do is really important. I did work with some really great data scientists, especially at Lemonade. We built some really fantastic model, like our LTV model as an example. But what make that successful is we always have the direct connection to the business. You need to know when I build this model, how people will use them, how you expect people to use them, how you reinforce that, right? That's equally important. And I agree. Now, maybe some of the initial barriers is very different. Of course, when you need to productionize certain things, you want to keep them really high quality. You still need a professional, but you don't need to have all of this in place before you try some idea out.
You mentioned some LTV model, etc. It's very important to understand how someone will use that. How do you reinforce that with your team or in general in Lemonade or in other companies you've been at? Like, do you meet with the person? Do you iterate closely with the person that at the end of the day will use the data?
I think for that is a yes and no. At least for Lemonade, that was one of my first project when I joined Lemonade. And one, we do need to know what are the potential use cases, but we were not trying to build a model for everyone. We kind of identify what is the main use case. And it is kind of up to us to figure out the best way to do that. We do need to have certain point of view, right? And then once we have this, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. They have certain needs, but I hold certain line. What should the model do? What should be outside the model? That's kind of a interesting kind of almost kind of a push and pull. And you don't want to just build something purely based on what people ask for, because very often they're only asking for that because they have what's available to them now. You need to factor in a few iterations. Of course, during this process, you see actually there's a huge gap between what I built versus what they need. You need to challenge your own assumption. But I don't just do things. Sometimes like I hold certain lines very firmly, like this is what the model is supposed to do. This is not what we are willing to compromise, because otherwise you end up with something that couldn't do anything because it tries to do too many things.
Interesting. Well, Chun, thank you again for joining us. This is Crunching Data brought to you by Mattia. I'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Crunching Data, brought to you by Mattia, the unified data ops platform. You can find us at mattia.io.